I need you to sit with me for a minute because what happened today is bigger than it looks, bigger than the headline, bigger than the scroll. On February 27th, 2026, the President of the United States went on to Truth Social and instructed every federal agency to immediately stop using the technology of an artificial intelligence company called Anthropic. Every agency, effective now, with a 6-month phase out for the Pentagon, which has been using that company's tools for classified intelligence analysis, cyber operations, and military planning. On the surface, it reads like a clash between a president and a tech firm. And if that were all this was, I wouldn't be here talking to you like this. But this is not about one company. It's about something much deeper. It's about who decides how the most powerful technology ever built gets used and under what rules. Anthropic did not refuse to work with the military. In fact, they were the first AI company cleared to operate on classified government networks. They wanted to continue. They asked for 2 safeguards, just 2. We'll get to them. The details matter. But before we go there, I want you to understand something more fundamental. The way a government reacts when one of its own partners disagrees with it tells you everything about the health of its institutions. Everything. You don't measure a democracy by how it handles agreement. You measure it by what happens when someone it relies on says, we need to talk about this. What happened today should concern Americans across the political spectrum, not because of party, but because of trajectory, because of where this road could lead. To understand this moment, you have to rewind. This didn't start today. It didn't start this month. Back in July 2025, the Pentagon awarded contracts worth up to $200 million each to 4 American AI companies: Anthropic, OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and Elon Musk's xAI. The goal was clear: bring the most advanced commercial AI into our defense infrastructure. On its face, that's rational. Our adversaries are not waiting. China is investing heavily in AI. The urgency is real. Then in January, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth released a new AI strategy. It required any company working with the Pentagon to allow its models to be used for all lawful purposes and to remove all company-specific safeguards. All of them. Now, for decades, the federal government built its own cutting-edge technology. Nuclear propulsion, stealth aircraft, GPS, government funded it. Government set the parameters, industry executed. AI flips that model. The most powerful systems in the world are being built by private companies, backed by private capital, moving faster than traditional federal research structures can keep up with. That shift changes the balance of power in ways we're still learning to navigate. And here's the lesson that matters. You cannot force a productive partnership by intimidation. It doesn't work, not sustainably. Anthropic was the Pentagon's most embedded AI partner, the first cleared for classified systems, which makes what happened next significant. They drew 2 lines. They said their AI could not be used for mass domestic surveillance of American citizens, and it could not be used in fully autonomous weapon systems that remove humans entirely from the loop. That was it. They didn't reject intelligence work. They didn't reject cyber operations. They didn't reject planning. They were already participating in those areas. They wanted to continue. On February 26th, their CEO, Dario Amodei, released a statement saying, "We cannot in good conscience accede to their request." That's not casual language. That's someone fully aware a $200 million contract is on the line and choosing principle over revenue. You may disagree with his stance, but you cannot dismiss the seriousness of it. The Pentagon responded with 2 simultaneous threats. First, labeling Anthropic a supply chain risk, a designation historically applied to foreign firms posing national security threats. Second, raising the possibility of invoking the Defense Production Act to compel the company to hand over unrestricted versions of its AI models. Pause there. One threat says you're dangerous to America. The other says your technology is so vital we may force you to provide it. That contradiction matters. And here's where it becomes more complicated. The Pentagon's own spokesperson said publicly that the department has no intention of using AI for mass surveillance or fully autonomous weapons. If that's true, and I want to believe it is, then why not codify it in the contract? Why resist putting into writing what you're already saying out loud? When assurances live only in statements, not in ink, that gap deserves scrutiny. Presidential leadership carries weight. Words move markets, shape alliances, signal values. On February 27th, the president referred to Anthropic as left-wing nut jobs and a radical left-woke company, and ordered agencies to cease using their technology. A president absolutely has the authority to decide which contractors the government works with. That's not the dispute. The issue is the signal sent when a policy disagreement about guardrails becomes framed as a culture war confrontation. When governance turns into performance, consequences follow. Then a senior Pentagon official publicly accused Dario Amodei of having a God complex, claiming he wanted to control the military. Disagreements between government and contractors are not unusual. But when credibility attacks replace negotiation, the damage extends beyond one relationship. It affects the ecosystem of trust that makes public-private partnerships viable. Institutions are not just contracts, they're networks of confidence. And when trust fractures in one place, it rarely stays contained. Anthropic was the only AI company cleared for classified Pentagon systems until just days ago when xAI reached an agreement allowing its Grok model into classified environments. Replacing deeply embedded infrastructure is not like switching email providers. According to reporting, rebuilding that integration could take months during a period when China is accelerating military AI development. But operational gaps are only part of this story. In the private sector, OpenAI's CEO circulated a memo affirming similar red lines. Hundreds of employees at Google DeepMind and OpenAI signed a letter expressing solidarity with Anthropic's position. That signals something larger. The confrontation isn't isolated. It touches the broader conscience of an industry. And when the researchers building the systems you depend on collectively raise concerns, the question becomes unavoidable. Does this make us stronger, or does it weaken the very foundation we're trying to fortify? If the message from Washington becomes comply without question or face public destruction, eventually the most capable people stop engaging. The best firms reconsider bidding, and the partners who remain are the ones willing to accept anything without resistance. That is not the kind of ecosystem you want when the stakes involve national security. Let me be direct about something. The language used, woke, radical, left-wing nut jobs, that is not the vocabulary of a careful national security deliberation. That is campaign rhetoric. And there is a difference. When you take a serious governance question, how artificial intelligence should be integrated into military operations, and you collapse it into another front in a cultural battle, you narrow the space for thoughtful, bipartisan, technically grounded discussion. And we need that space. Look at the profile of Anthropic. This is a company that voluntarily severed ties with firms linked to the Chinese Communist Party, sacrificing significant revenue. A company that advocated for strong export controls to preserve America's lead in advanced chips. A company that was first to deploy its systems on classified networks. That does not resemble an entity seeking to undermine American defense. It resembles one attempting to participate responsibly. Yet the moment they articulated two limits the Pentagon itself says it does not plan to cross, they were publicly branded as adversarial. Consider the precedent that sets. What does the next company infer from that? That raising a concern is disloyal? That negotiating contract language is defiance? That caution equals opposition? I also want to acknowledge another development. The one company that has fully accepted the Pentagon's terms for classified access is xAI, owned by Elon Musk, who maintains visible proximity to this administration. I'm not making accusations. But when procurement outcomes begin to appear aligned with political alignment, that perception alone can erode confidence. Our defense acquisition system has historically rested on the principle that capability, not ideology, determines selection. If that principle weakens, performance will eventually follow. So where does this go? There are several paths. One possibility is the one already outlined publicly: a 6-month phase out across the Pentagon and an immediate cessation elsewhere. If that proceeds as described, you're looking at months of disruption in intelligence workflows, cyber operations, and planning systems, and global competitors are not pausing while we recalibrate internally. Another possibility is that solidarity within the industry solidifies into broader resistance. If other major firms maintain similar guardrails, the tension shifts from one contractor to an entire sector, and you cannot construct a 21st century defense architecture without 21st century technology partners. There is also the Defense Production Act. If it were invoked to compel transfer of unrestricted AI models, it would establish a precedent with long-term implications. Entrepreneurs, engineers, investors, they would have to weigh the possibility that participation in government work could eventually mean forfeiting control under terms they did not negotiate. Innovation ecosystems are sensitive to that kind of uncertainty. And then there is the quieter scenario. Cooler heads convene. Contract language is adjusted. Public rhetoric recedes. A compromise emerges that respects both operational needs and stated safeguards. That outcome is still possible. But the higher the escalation, the harder de-escalation becomes. There is another dimension here that deserves attention. Our geopolitical competitors do not face this dynamic. Their private sectors do not publicly refuse state directives. Some may view that as efficiency. But the freedom of an American company to say, we believe this crosses a line, is not dysfunction. It is a feature of a democratic system. It is part of what has made our innovation landscape globally competitive. That freedom only strengthens us if leaders understand how to engage with it constructively. Now, let me say something clearly. The United States government has a duty to defend this country. No private firm should dictate military operations. If the Department of Defense determines that artificial intelligence is essential to protecting American lives, then collaboration with the private sector is necessary. There is no serious argument otherwise. But democracy complicates power, and it enriches it. The question is not whether AI should support national defense. It should. The question is whether we are building a structure where the most capable minds want to participate, where they trust that raising a concern will be debated, not punished, where disagreement does not trigger public vilification. When policy disputes transform into political purges, the consequences are subtle. Engineers do not issue dramatic resignations. They simply decline future projects. Companies do not stage protests. They redirect resources. Gradually, the partnership shifts from excellence to compliance. Compliance without conscience may look orderly, but it is brittle. I have seen moments in our history when fear or politics pushed institutions beyond balance, periods of overreach that later required correction. Course correction is possible. It has happened before. Not because leaders were flawless, but because enough people recognized the stakes and adjusted. What I hope for now is seriousness. Leaders willing to treat this as governance, not theater. Willing to sit across from one another and write language that reflects both security needs and democratic values. Because if we can do that, we will find equilibrium. We will equip the military while preserving the principles that justify that strength. America's resilience has never come from uniform agreement. It has come from open argument, from the willingness to wrestle with hard questions in public and in good faith. If we substitute persuasion with punishment, dialogue with domination, we risk undermining the very system we claim to defend. That is the tension in front of us. It's still unfolding, and how it resolves will tell us a great deal about who we are becoming. And here's the part that stays with me. When the most talented researchers in the country begin to question whether working with their own government is worth the risk, that's not just a contract dispute. That's a signal. It's quiet. It doesn't trend the way a presidential post does, but it travels through labs, through boardrooms, through venture capital meetings. And once that hesitation takes root, it's difficult to reverse. I remember how fragile those relationships can be. Public-private partnerships aren't built on pressure alone. They're built on predictability, on mutual respect, on the understanding that when disagreements happen, and they will, they're handled with seriousness, not spectacle. If the lesson companies absorb from this moment is that raising guardrails leads to public denunciation, then the rational response isn't rebellion, it's withdrawal. And withdrawal doesn't make headlines, it just reshapes the future quietly. Now think about the broader message internationally. China and Russia are watching this unfold. Their systems don't permit companies to refuse. They don't negotiate red lines publicly. Some will argue that makes them faster, more streamlined. But speed without accountability carries its own risks. The American model has always been more complicated, messier, but that friction, the debate, the checks, the pushback, that friction has historically produced stronger outcomes because it forces clarity, it forces justification. The concern isn't that a president made a contracting decision. Presidents do that. The concern is how the disagreement was framed and what precedent it sets. When a company that has demonstrated national security alignment, cutting off Chinese-linked firms, supporting export controls, integrating into classified systems, draws two boundaries and is immediately cast as hostile, that reframes caution as betrayal, and that reframing doesn't stay contained to one situation. It shapes expectations going forward. I want to come back to those two lines for a moment. No mass domestic surveillance, no fully autonomous weapons removing humans entirely from the loop. Those are not fringe concepts in global AI ethics discussions. They're part of ongoing debates across governments and research communities. The Pentagon itself has publicly said it does not intend to pursue those applications. So the unresolved question remains. If there is alignment in public statements, why resist alignment in contract language? That's where transparency becomes important, because trust depends on clarity. There's also a practical dimension. Transitioning away from an embedded AI system inside classified environments is not instantaneous. According to reporting, rebuilding equivalent infrastructure could take months. During that time, analysts adjust, systems recalibrate, workflows shift. And all of that happens while geopolitical competitors continue integrating AI into their own military planning. Operational disruption may be temporary, but perception lingers longer. There is another possibility here that doesn't get discussed as loudly. It's that this conflict becomes a template, that future administrations, regardless of party, observe this and conclude that public pressure is an effective negotiating tool with technology partners. If that becomes normalized, then every major contract negotiation risks becoming political theater. And once that line blurs, rebuilding a culture of good faith negotiation becomes harder each cycle. I also think about the young engineers watching this, the graduate students deciding where to take their expertise, the startup founders choosing whether to bid on federal work. They're absorbing more than policy. They're absorbing tone. They're absorbing signals about whether independent judgment is valued or punished. And talent flows toward environments where it feels respected. Let me be clear again. National defense is not optional. The government must have the tools it needs to protect American lives. AI will be part of that reality. The debate is not over whether technology should serve security. It's over how that service is structured and governed. Democracy is demanding. It requires negotiation. It requires leaders who can tolerate friction without escalating it. That's harder than issuing directives. It's slower than posting denunciations, but it's sturdier. If this moment ends with cooler heads drafting precise language, clarifying boundaries, and reaffirming shared objectives, then the disruption may prove temporary. If it ends with hardened positions and lingering distrust, the consequences will stretch further, because trust, once fractured, doesn't return on command. We are still early in this story. The 6-month phase-out window suggests there is time for recalibration, time for private conversations, time for reconsideration. That window matters. What I don't want is for us to drift into a posture where technological leadership and political loyalty become intertwined. Our competitive advantage has always rested on merit, on attracting the best ideas wherever they originate domestically and integrating them into national strength. If merit gives way to alignment tests, capability eventually erodes. I have faith in the capacity of American institutions to self-correct. History shows that even after periods of overreach, recalibration is possible. It requires humility. It requires recognition that strength is not demonstrated through domination alone, but through durable partnership. The core question remains simple, even if the implications are not. Are we building a system where the best minds want to participate in national defense, where they believe their concerns will be debated seriously, where collaboration feels principled, not coerced? Because if the answer tilts the other way, the loss won't be immediate or dramatic. It will be gradual, incremental, and by the time it's visible, rebuilding may be more difficult. That's why this moment matters beyond one contract, beyond one company, beyond one president. It touches how power and innovation interact in a democracy. And that balance between security and liberty, between authority and partnership, that balance is delicate. We still have the ability to get it right. But getting it right requires recognizing what's at stake before the window narrows further. There's something else I want you to hold in your mind as this continues to unfold. Strength in a democracy is not measured by how quickly you can silence disagreement. It's measured by whether disagreement strengthens the final outcome. That's the test. And right now, we're being tested. If the government believes certain AI capabilities are essential for national defense, then the argument for them should be strong enough to withstand scrutiny. It should be able to be written down clearly, defended publicly, negotiated privately. That's how durable policy is built. But if raising a boundary, even a narrow one, triggers public denunciation, then the signal being sent is different. It says the appearance of unity matters more than the substance of alignment, and appearance can be manufactured. Alignment cannot. I keep thinking about the phrase supply chain risk. Historically, that designation has been reserved for foreign companies tied to adversarial governments. Applying that language to an American firm that has publicly supported U.S. export controls and cut ties with Chinese-linked entities is not a small rhetorical shift. Words like that carry weight. They echo beyond the immediate dispute. And then there's the Defense Production Act. It exists for emergencies, for moments when the nation truly requires extraordinary measures. Even raising the possibility of using it to compel transfer of unrestricted AI models changes the calculation for every innovator watching. Because once a tool designed for crisis becomes part of contract leverage, the boundaries blur. Blurred boundaries create caution. Caution slows collaboration. I also want to acknowledge something that's easy to overlook. Presidents are under enormous pressure. National security decisions are not abstract. They involve real risks, real consequences. The instinct to secure every possible advantage is understandable. But how that instinct is exercised matters just as much as the objective itself. Authority can be firm without being inflammatory, decisive without being dismissive. What concerns me is not that a firm disagreement occurred. Disagreements are inevitable in emerging technologies. What concerns me is whether the escalation narrowed the space for compromise, because compromise here does not mean weakness. It means crafting language that protects operational flexibility while acknowledging ethical guardrails. It means recognizing that private sector partners bring both capability and conscience to the table. And conscience in a democracy should not automatically be treated as defiance. There's a risk that this moment becomes symbolic, that it signals a shift from partnership to posture, from negotiation to loyalty testing. If that perception spreads, even unfairly, it reshapes behavior. Talented engineers may decide their work is better suited to purely commercial applications. Venture capital may steer away from dual-use technologies that involve federal contracts. Companies may insert broader protective clauses into future agreements. Each of those adjustments is rational on its own, but collectively they alter the ecosystem. National strength depends on that ecosystem functioning smoothly. We are competing in an era where artificial intelligence will influence everything from battlefield logistics to cyber defense to intelligence analysis. The pace is accelerating. The margin for error narrows as systems become more capable. In that environment, the United States cannot afford internal fractures between its defense institutions and its most advanced technology firms, not prolonged ones. And yet, we also cannot afford to erode the principles that differentiate us from authoritarian competitors. That tension is real. It doesn't resolve itself automatically. It requires deliberate stewardship. I've said before that democracy is complicated and beautiful. It is complicated because it forces negotiation. It is beautiful because it protects the right to say no. Both of those truths are present in this moment. The question is whether we can hold them together. If leaders across government and industry step back from the rhetoric and return to the table with seriousness, this could still end as a recalibration rather than a rupture. If not, the precedent set here will echo into every future negotiation involving advanced technology and national security. And precedents have long memories. America has navigated transformative technological shifts before. Nuclear weapons, space exploration, the early internet. Each time, the balance between public authority and private innovation required adjustment. There were missteps, there were corrections, but ultimately the system endured because enough people were committed to preserving both strength and liberty. That commitment is being tested again. What happens next will not be determined by one post or one press release. It will be determined by whether the people involved choose escalation or equilibrium, whether they treat disagreement as sabotage or as part of the democratic process. The road forward is still open. The 6-month phase-out window leaves room for course correction. Quiet conversations may already be happening. They often do. I hope they are serious. I hope they are focused on substance rather than spectacle. Because at the end of the day, artificial intelligence is a tool. Powerful, yes. Transformative, absolutely. But still a tool. The values guiding its use, that's where the real story lives. If we can reaffirm that strength and conscience are not mutually exclusive, that national security and ethical guardrails can coexist, then this moment may ultimately reinforce our institutions rather than weaken them. If we cannot, the cost won't show up immediately. It will accumulate slowly in missed partnerships, in diverted talent, in quiet hesitations that compound over time. We still have the capacity to choose wisely. That's the part I believe deeply. The strength of America has never come from forcing uniformity. It has come from persuading diverse actors to align toward a common purpose. That requires patience. It requires restraint. It requires leaders who understand that power is most durable when it invites participation rather than demands submission. This situation is still unfolding. The story isn't finished, but how we handle it will say a great deal about whether we are confident enough in our democracy to let it function the way it was designed to.